Thank you. Introducing
And now I'd like to introduce, he doesn't really need any introduction, but Brent Bell.
All right, I'm not sure you do this. I might need a little hand here to get the rocking chairs up here, but we're going to do something we did last year. For those of you at the conference, we had Preston Klein interviewed Carl Ronke, and we recorded it on tape, and we're going to be doing this again. I'm going to be interviewing Dan Garvey, and this is part of a new initiative that we started. 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, at Camp Kiev, we had Josh Miner come and speak. And Josh Miner, who started Outward Bound, gave a great speech. And afterwards, everyone wondered, like, how can I get a copy of that speech? I wanna hear that again. It was a really inspiring, wonderful moment. And since then, we thought that we wanted to try to record some of these moments, and doing that, invite some of the people who've been influential to outdoor education and influential to us. And we've named this the Josh Miner Dialogue Series, and his family we've talked to his family and told him we want to do this as a region. So this is a new thing for us. So from now on, this will be the Josh Miner Dialogue Series. And last year, Carl, we're going to consider him the first speaker. And this year, we're happy to have Dan Garvey join us. Just a second. How's it going to work here? Take that one? All right. So, a little bit different sound. So first we have to check that that the video is working, because
how are we going to do that?
All right. Okay.
How are we going to check to see?
I'm looking at Mike, and he's giving the okay sign. All right. Okay, so now we'll pay attention to the audience. Okay. So I guess just in introducing Dan, I hadn't planned this part, but I will do it from memory, and I think I know it fairly well. Dan has just been.
If you get stuck, I've got most of the details.
Okay.
Just in case, sure.
Dan agreed that the most important part of this is to make the interviewer look good. So we have that. But Dan was been a professor at UNH. He directed the Upward Bound program at the University of New Hampshire, and that's where I first came to know him. He was the executive director of AEE. He is now the president of Prescott College. He was the director of Mara Vista. Been all around the experiential education, and I think most of all, when I sort of walk through this world and in these groups, everyone has a Dan Garvey story, and every time I say Dan Garvey, they're like, oh yeah, Dan Garvey, and known for his humor, his sarcasm, and his inspiration. So we'll sort of start from there. Let's hope you can live up to it.
Well, for the people in the back, if we sit down, is it going to ruin the? I mean, will you be able to see? How would you know? We haven't sat down yet. How's that? You can't.
I can't see you guys, so.
Stand on the chair.
What do you think? Do you want to? Okay, this will be.
How's it going so far? Go ahead.
I feel like we got a boy band going on here. Okay. So, lip syncing here. So, I guess the part of this, Dan, is really want to start out with asking you about your past and like how you grew up and where you grew up and your family, and I guess I'll leave it that open if you could.
All right.
Fill it in.
Before I start, what I'd like to say is that this is a tad bit uncomfortable, and I think you can appreciate that. All of us have stories that we could tell, and for any of us that have really interesting stories where we've done really interesting things, the question is always, how much of this story do I tell, and how much do I keep to myself? Because the world shouldn't know all of our stories. So it's a little uncomfortable being in front of you, because usually I have a script, and I stated the script, and I'm sort of speaking as a personality. And so I'd like to have that acknowledged, that we don't really know where this is going. It could be very scary. when you find out what is actually going on in the internal tape, Keith, it could be frightening, is the word I was thinking of. So, but anyway, I appreciate the fact that people would be interested, and we're going to hopefully get an opportunity for people to ask us questions or me questions and sort of get off of this kind of patter. But where did I grow up?
Yeah.
Okay. I was born in the Berkshires and grew up mostly in Springfield. Grew up on the edge of a forest in a pretty standard neighborhood situation with way too many kids my age, and very diverse community setting. And I'm one of 3 children. The older sister is a psychologist in California, so she has a lot of work. And I have a younger brother who lives with his family in the same place that I do in Prescott, within probably quarter of a mile from my house. So we're together and we play in a band together. I'm probably the only harp-playing blues president of any college in the country. So the family's still together, everybody's around.
I wonder, when you were young, did you sort of see this career at all? I mean, you probably didn't see outdoor educator, but did you have like a life of adventure or certain sort of moments that this sort of makes sense? Or did this?
Yeah, it makes, to the extent that any of our lives make sense, it does sort of make sense. I've wandered my whole life. I think that would be a fair statement. These are all new questions, just so you know. These aren't prepared. These are spontaneous responses. But I've wandered my whole life. I was the kind of person that would get on a bus. I was told by my mother one time that I got on a bus with no particular destination and just rode the bus to another city and then made a phone call from there asking how I was going to get home. I took a bike ride when I was about 11 by myself from Springfield and made it to Hartford, and didn't have enough energy to get back and had to call. So the idea that I would have ended up somehow doing experiential ed or those kinds of things makes a lot of sense to me. You know, I hitchhiked across the country 3 times. I left home at 18 to live in a commune in Hawaii and surf. I didn't even know where Hawaii was at the time. I thought it was right off the coast of California, sort of like Catalina Island. And as we were up in the air for about an hour, I was starting to get a little anxious because I thought we were going to end up in the Orient somewhere. I had no real idea of where it was. But yeah, so I mean, experiential ed seemed to be a natural way to continue to wander. That sounds like something you'd say, Keith. I think I wander.
I wander. What about college? Where did you go to school? And
I went to undergraduate school at Worcester State College. I'm trying to make these stories somewhat interesting. I was graduated from high school, got a football scholarship. I was about 240 pounds. Had a 34-inch waist. I have a 36-inch waist now. We were the state champions, and I was on to play football. About a week before school opened, they had a slash, cut in the funding. And so the school I was going to go to called me up and said, well, you're not going to play here. So I was standing on the street corner in Westboro, Massachusetts, and the director of admissions drove by in his car and asked me what I was still doing there. And I said, well, I'm not going to school because I didn't get a scholarship. And so he put me in his car and drove me to Worcester State College and signed me up, and that was it. I played soccer for the next 4 years. He needed a soccer player, and I needed a place to go to school. If any of you, since I'm a college president, I'm always looking for more enrollments. If any of you are in the wrong school, there's still room, and I'd be glad to pick you up in my car and drive you out. We'll end up in Prescott, Arizona, which is a lot nicer than Worcester, Mass. Too, so just let me know. There's plenty of room.
I wonder from your youth or in that time, maybe what was like one of the greatest educational experiences that you had back in your youth, and maybe also on the other end, just to make it harder, is maybe a miseducative experience.
Well, the greatest experience of that period was both. When I was 15, my father was killed in a car accident. He was out, with my mother, and they had just come back from dinner, and some guys from a fraternity party had just emptied out from the fraternity party, and they drove through a red light, and he was killed in the accident. I later became a dean of students and was responsible for discipline at the University of New Hampshire for like 9 years. You think there's any connection here? I think I was still working through issues. I didn't even think about that until someone pointed it out to me about a year ago. I thought, no, they're not related. And I thought, oh my God, this is terrible.
I was just going to do my Terry Gross on that. I thought that was my... Wow.
So that was the most formative experience. He was, I'm okay with it, so you don't have to worry, I'm not going to fall apart here. But, we were very, very close, and it was, it was very abrupt and a very tragic thing. And at 15, I just, I sort of lost faith. That would be a good way to say it. I realized that we are not in an orderly world, that fate is absolutely ambivalent and disinterested in who we might be. And so it became sort of an interesting place to find myself at 15, where I just kind of felt like there's no real order in the world, and being a good boy doesn't really mean much. So that was the biggest and the best experience, I think.
Can you talk about, I know you went on from there to invent experiential education. It's one of my favorite stories, and I wonder if...
It's true. It's true. My children. Thank you. Only I would be here if I hadn't invented it. So, there's a small story that goes along to it. It's probably not interesting to you, but how you got here. Well, no, the truth is, I've been doing community organizing in Puerto Rico, and I needed a job when I came back to the States. So I went back to Worcester, and I bumped into a guy that I used to play high school basketball against, and he was hiring for social services, when people don't have jobs. But I was like 22 at the time, but I knew that's where I wanted to go. And so he gave me this job at this a residential treatment center, and I'd never heard of what those were. And I thought, growing up in New England, that it was a prep school. I thought, okay, that would be cool. So I showed up for my job interview with a tweed jacket and stuff like that. And during the interview, I was walking around, and a kid came up and opened my jacket and took my pen out and snapped it in front of me. I thought, wow, this isn't like Exeter. So at 23 and having the background that I've sort of alluded to, I really didn't have many coping skills. I had fight, I had that one down pretty well, and I had flight. As most of you know that have ever been around young males, they're pretty retarded when it comes to a variety of emotional responses, and I certainly was one of those. Sorry if there are no young males here, so I feel okay. But so I had those two down. But basically what happened was I was so comfortable in the woods that I started taking students out into the woods. And I found that when I was in the woods with them, no one else was doing this. Go back with me to another era. No one was doing this, and I would bring these kids out into the woods, and I would take them alone on these camping trips. And I'd bring them back, and the rest of the staff it was like they had seen a beatific vision that I lived by taking these kids out and bringing them back. It was like astonishing to them that I would put them in the van, I would take responsibility and bring them back. Well, I started to believe my own PR. I started to think, damn right I'm good. I mean, this is incredible what I do. And I kept doing it and doing it. And I really thought that all I needed to do was write this up and publish it, and probably at 24 I'd be done working. I could just kind of send it to people and everyone would start doing this. And I came out of the woods and I went to an AEE conference, and Bob was there at Portsmouth in probably 1978 or 79 or something like that. I walked into the AEE conference, the regional conference. No, it was a national conference then. Walked into the conference, and there's a whole track of people that are doing this. And it was like, I couldn't believe it. Like, there were books written on it. People had been doing it for years. It had a name. My whole life flashed before my eyes, and I thought, shit, I'm going to be working till I'm well into my 50s. And, you know, that's turned out to be pretty true. So, anyway, I thought I had invented something that you would have benefited from, and I found that, as with most great ideas, I was one of the ants on the log of life again.
So another story I've heard, and this is maybe clarification, is that you then went to the University of New Hampshire to interview for an upward bound position. But it sounds like you might not be great at details. I'm not sure, but
Are these interesting at all to you? All right, here's the first 4 jobs that I had in my life. I totally missed the interview process. I didn't interview or didn't think I was getting what I was getting. I was interviewing for something completely different, and it started with Valley View Farm, going and thinking I was going to work at a private prep school, and we were going to say for sure and yeah, that kind of stuff. And it turns out to be this place where I'm the disciplinarian, okay? That was my job. I was the man. I was responsible for the discipline of these young males. Then there was a job at UNH that came available, and it was for the director of the Upward Bound program. But I didn't read the ad correctly. I thought it was the director of the Outward Bound program, which I thought, eminently qualified to take over. So I sent in all of my stuff, and I got an interview somehow, I don't know how. And about halfway through the interview, I asked if I could see, it was not going real well. You can, Upward Bound works with economically disadvantaged high school students, trying to get them into college. Outward Bound, well, you know what Outward Bound is. So their responses to my questions are not exactly in line. I'm asking questions and they're giving me responses, and I'm trying to figure out what UNH is doing with an Outward Bound program like this. Doesn't sound like they even take people in the woods. It sounds like they're doing Outward Bound in the classroom, and I'm trying to make sense out of it. And then I asked them if I could go see the equipment room. Yeah. That was exciting. So they brought me into this room where they had all these rapid readers where people could learn how to read fast with what was called the SQ3R reading system. It was like a machine. Some of you probably still have scars from leaning your heads against those, being bad little students and having to read against that. Well, anyway, I walked in and I thought, how the hell did they take those in the backcountry? So it was a long interview, and somehow I got the job. I mean, it was insane, and it was a great job. I mean, and Brent ended up working with that program. We put it out to a program and immediately, and we started doing Outward Bound. I'll be damned, you can call it what you want, but I'm going to do the job I came to do. I don't need no stinking Upward Bound work. So anyway, so that's that story.
You said, like, then afterwards, the next job you had was Dean of Students, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
the next job was the Dean of Students. And I mean, just quickly, for all of you that feel like you've got this trajectory worked out in your life, give it up, Just give it up. The next one, there were 2 jobs available in the Dean of Students office at the University of New Hampshire. One was for the Director of Commuter Affairs, working with commuter students, and the other was for the Dean of Freshmen. I sent my application in to be the Director of Commuter Affairs because I could never see myself as a dean. I mean, like, that was some other kind of personality. I mean, somebody else becomes a dean, it's not me. And they put my resume in the wrong file. And I got hired as the Dean of Freshmen. And the most recent one was president of Prescott College. I just, I was on a delayed flight, and there was, no. Actually, if you'll indulge me, that story is the best of all. And this should give some support to people that are interested in doing service. I had done the accreditation review for Prescott College, and I had to go back and do the reaccreditation review for Prescott College, so I was the lead reviewer for AEE doing Prescott College. And while I was doing the interview, I learned that they had recently fired their president. And they had an investment banker in the city who was operating as the interim president, so he didn't know anything about higher education. So I'm doing the accreditation review, and the last night of the review, they throw a little party for us, to make us feel warm and fuzzy and make sure we give them a good evaluation. During the party, Sturgis, who's the banker, walks up to me and he goes, people really like you. Would you be interested in being the president? And this is a true story. The other ones are totally fictitious, but this one's true. And I said to her, Sturgis, you can't do this. This is so inappropriate. You don't take the lead reviewer and offer them a job, and certainly not the presidency. I mean, why don't you just take a large wad of unmarked bills and put them in a sack and leave them in my rental car? I mean, this is so gross what you're doing. So I dismissed it, and there are people in this audience, actually, who were with me as graduate students when I agonized over the decision as to whether or not I would go. Thanks for all your support, all of you guys. But that's how that one came. I mean, it was just, I was doing an AE accreditation review, kind of cursing the darkness that I had gone there. I wasn't getting paid. What am I doing out here? I'm in Arizona. I could be doing something else at home. And, it was just a service thing. And it got me the presidency. And, I've been happy. The people in Prescott have always wondered, like, what is that AEE thing? But, yeah, anyway, so. I bet that's a take-home for you, isn't it? That the kind of thing that you can run to your diaries and your journals and write down, geez, you know what I learned? I learned that life is more random and that I should give up all these things.
Or do accreditation reviews. I think that's the so one of the things I'm sort of picking up is, like, I know, like, at Upward Bound, you put this outdoor program, and it still exists today. It's a very strong part of the UNH Upward Bound program, and somewhat unique to all the Upward Bounds across the country. When you're Dean of Students, you brought in experiential ed into the Dean of Students office, and I thought if you want to talk about starting up Fireside in that program.
Well, I mean, more generically, my focus in life, I guess if I were to say what's my mission is to be a change agent, a positive change agent. And so the institution that I happen to be working for, fortunately or unfortunately, is incidental to me. What I really want to do is I really want to make change, educational reform. And the most potent educational reform tool that I know of, and I can actually prove it from research, is the kind of stuff that we're involved in experiential education. It's the only one that has predictably changed people's sense of moral reasoning and justice. So the reason why outdoor ed programs have always been connected to the things that I believe in is because all I'm really interested in is helping people make good decisions and for them to be reasonable contributors in the world. And experiential education was the best vehicle I could find. If something else comes along, I tried study abroad, as may have I've sailed around the world 3 times with students, and I've tried all sorts of different things, but experiential ed in the form that we often employ it is the most potent that I can find. And if something else comes along, I'd be more than happy to start doing that. So it just made sense to me, as it probably does to many of you too.
So I wonder about what kind of things that, given this pulpit, like you tell a group of experiential educators, like maybe things that you would like to see us focusing on more, or doing more vigorously that we're already doing, or what we should stop doing.
No, it's
this is your chance.
yeah. I actually get that chance quite often when I'm writing, and I feel much braver at a computer than I do in front of people. But when I'm writing, I usually encourage us to think about the deeper meaning of what we do. That probably most of you know by now that we used to say that the reason that we do experiential education is because we build people's self-confidence and et cetera, et cetera. Have you heard that before? This is good because we pretty much know now that there's no correlation between someone's self-confidence and whether they do a whit of good work or goodwill to anyone else but themselves. So the fact that we would raise someone's self-confidence, and in doing that believe that we are making that person or the world a better place, only works if you're talking about people who need psychiatric help. If you are an unscrupulous person and I raise your self-confidence, I make you more unscrupulous. If you are a predator and I raise your self-confidence, basically, I give you more tools to become a predator. So I guess the admonition I would make or ask you to consider is, let's stop worrying about people's self-confidence and let's start thinking about the deeper meaning behind the work that we do. And I think the deeper meaning of what we do is not how we feel about ourselves, but it's how we feel about the people in our groups. And most of us already know that. I'm not speaking to a group of people that don't understand that, but our larger obligation, I think, is for us to give our participants experiences that help them connect to the other participants, so that the take-home for them is, how are they in relationship to other people as opposed to who they are themselves. I guess if that's kind of vague and obtuse, I apologize for that. I'm increasingly finding myself disinterested in people's personal journeys. I just haven't seen that personal journeys, whether it's yoga, meditation, I love these things. I am totally in support of them. But I don't think that they have much to do very often with people's ability to interact with other people in a reasonable way. So I support them. I practice them myself. That's not, but I do it for a different reason. I don't do it because I'm going to make myself good. And once I'm good, then I'll be okay to be with other people. I don't think we can wait that long, because I know Keith, for instance, he's got a couple years on me. He told me he's still approaching goodness. And if he hasn't gotten there, I know I'll never get there. So, is that too abstract, or?
Yeah, that was really bad.
Yeah, I thought it might. Let's talk
Let's
about
try again.
unfortunate jobs that I've fallen into. I think we were going well there, weren't we? Kind of went south when we got serious, but go ahead.
How about, is there a spiritual side to your life? Do you have?
Woody Allen once said that he's not very religious, but he likes to hang out with people who are. And although I don't quote Woody Allen often for obvious reasons, that one sticks. It's probably no. There's not a deep spiritual connection for me. I've looked in that box my whole life, and I've come to believe that I probably haven't put enough. I haven't probably deposited enough in that account to draw from it. I have tremendous respect and admiration and envy for people who have a spiritual orientation. Maybe I do. Every time I say this to friends, they point out, oh, but you know what, but you do blank and blank. And I go, okay, but on a daily basis, I think I kind of miss that more. I had it very strong when I was a kid, and I mean, I don't want to make this seem seamless in terms of its presentation, but I think it probably was one of the things that left when I was 15. It was hard to come back from that. I don't walk around going, oh, look, it's not that. It's not at that level of consciousness. But I'd be lying to you if I told you that I did. It's an interesting thing because, are any of you reading Ken Wilber's work? All right, Ken Wilber, if you haven't gotten into Ken Wilber's work, I would encourage you to do so. And Ken Wilber is probably the most important living philosopher in my mind right now. And he's doing some really exciting work. Some of it will develop and some of it won't. But he was interviewed one time and they said, okay, this guy's brilliant. And they said, okay, if you had one thing to tell people, what would you tell them? And he said, develop a spiritual practice. And so from every angle that I can see, my comment to you should be seen as an outlier, not as a model. And as you were asking me this question, I had that nanosecond where I had to decide whether to be truthful or sort of attractive. And I went for truthful.
Well, obviously, Dan, you're a very thoughtful person. I'm wondering what kind of practices you do, or do you have, I don't know, are you like naturally thoughtful, or I mean, I think I've heard you talk about like journal writing, or do you have like a practice, or you?
This may be the same world that you're in too, but I feel like my brain is like CNN. There is something that's happening, and then there is this stuff that's going on underneath all the time. Is there anybody's brain like that? So I don't know if I'm unique. I have never checked this out with other people, but virtually every moment I am in some state of consciousness where I am thinking about something else that's going on while I'm simultaneously I'm doing it right now.
That's my next question.
It's not stupid stuff. It's not like, do people like me and that kind of stuff. It can, so to me, the thoughtful part, I guess, is I am endlessly fascinated by the subtext of life. That would be the easiest thing. There's the apparent, what is going on around us all the time, and then there is the subtext. You have a conversation with someone and you're having this conversation, and what is happening around the conversation is endlessly interesting to me. And I don't say that I get it right or that I have some special power to understand it. I don't. But my thoughtfulness is paying attention to what's going on when that tape is running under the pictures that we see. And I find that life is hilarious there and unbelievably entertaining and joyous and loving. I think most of us interact, I mean, this sounds, I feel like I'm getting ready to sing We Are the World, but I won't. No, I mean it. I really won't. But I think at the base level, I think we are connected to each other in really wonderful, wonderful, affectionate ways. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the main text that doesn't allow us to see it, but if you just watch how people interact and kind of trust that. So my thoughtfulness, I guess, is based on the fact that I'm always at two places at the same time, which is going to be really uncomfortable for the next person I talk to after this. I can just imagine what that's going to feel like for you, but I told you, it could be scary, Keith. This is 35 years of you and I having conversations and me never really caring what you say. Only trying to interpret, intuit what it might be that you're meaning.
You read it well.
I'm just picking on Keith only because I hope you all feel, as I do, how grateful I am to see him still hanging around and part of this whole community. And if you don't take an opportunity to bump into this person, I mean it, it will be your loss. Do not let this conference go by without shaking his hand. Anyway.
Actually, there's a great story about your first meeting with Keith. Maybe that's is a good time to...
We actually tell this story slightly differently, but I'll tell you the true story. Because I have the mic. All right. So...
You want me to leave?
No. I get hired in the Dean of Students office as the Dean of Freshmen, and I decide we need to do this outdoor program, and I'm trying to figure out how to do this. And so for the first year and a half, the administration says you can do it, but you have to, you can't hire any staff. So the first year and a half, I lead 12 weekend trips each semester. And we stage, plus I go to work as the dean every Monday. And we stage out of my barn in Farmington, New Hampshire. So all of the equipment's in Farmington, and 12 weekends each semester, I'm in the woods. And at the end of that period of time, I don't know if I'm on foot or horseback, and people are telling me, you got to talk to this guy, Keith King, over at Keene State College. He's been doing this a long time. He really knows what's going on, yada, yada, yada. So I figure, okay, so I call him up. Will you come visit with me? I'd really like to pick your brain. I want to know everything there is about working with college students and on and on and on. So he says, sure. I don't know. He's like the world's biggest curmudgeon. I don't know this. I don't know he's like disagreeable as a personality type. Who's to know? This is 30-some-odd years ago. I think he's a reasonable, academic kind of person who's,
Too bad you felt.
right. So I get it, in those days you got buzzed like they do in the movies. Yes, Professor King is here. Okay, so I walk out and I greet him. He walks down the hallway, looks at the name tag on my door, and he goes, Dean? What the hell is that supposed to be? So I say, how about if we do this again? And I walk him back out into the lobby, and I say, why don't you have a seat? He sits down, and Carol buzzes me again. She goes, Professor King is here. I walk out and I go, hi, Keith, nice to meet you. I was like, I'll be damned if this guy, who's a full professor, is going to yank me around and tell me he doesn't know what a dean is. Crying out loud. So that was the infamous meeting. And I guess subtext, again, the assessment that I made, which was absolutely accurate, is that this is one of the most playful people in the world, and that if I was going to have any relationship with this guy, I better not be a shrinking violet, and I better learn to play with him. And so we better start right from the beginning. And if I think if I had ever said, well, Professor King, a dean is, is someone who's put on this earth to basically strangle your resources and give you a hard time. It probably wouldn't have worked. So anyway, again, I'll repeat. That's another take-home story for you that you want to make sure you tell. Yeah, no. Someday you may get your chance, and I'll be the victim of your side of the story. But right now, sorry.
So,
yeah.
I have what I call a few Dan Garveyisms. So and these are thoughts that basically.
Can we just check in? Is this going okay? Okay. All right. I don't need huge affirmation. I just need to know that this is not. I mean, because I don't know if we shifted places, I don't know how excited I'd be. No, I'd be pretty excited because I'd be amusing myself.
So is that
yeah.
I hope they like us.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is oftentimes in my life I'm walking around and I think of I come into a situation I think like Dan Garvey had this thought and I something that I sort of becomes a belief, I guess, for me, and I hear a lot of people talk about this. So I try to jot a few down. I just want to say them, and you can like correct them and figure out what they really are, and maybe just explain them a bit.
Okay.
So the first one is for outdoor educators. That we used to say "go for it," and now we say "slow down."
Right, these are crass reductions of deeply held beliefs that I've got that have now been reduced to bylines. Hours of painstaking thought. Contemplation gets reduced to one sentence.
I mean,
Two
come on,
sentences,
this is about
actually.
the American gladiators. This
Yeah,
is-
I did. No, I know what that one is. One of the evolutions of outdoor education, and you know this as well as I do, there was a time where, I would say, Mike, wouldn't you say that the most exciting thing that a student ever did was the stuff that we did with them? They would never think about climbing something or scaling something or zipping down something on their own. And so our mantra in those days was to encourage people to try to risk. And then the X Games generation emerged. And now you've got, all you have to do is turn TV on and you see people doing some of the most insane, risky behaviors that you could ever imagine. So now I find a lot of the times what we're doing as outdoor educators is we're asking our participants to slow down. I mean, how many times have you brought a group of 7th graders to a ropes course only to learn that 50% of those kids were at that ropes course last year, and now they want to go higher, farther, faster, blah, 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 and you're trying to teach them the deeper meaning. There are many of us in the room that remember that we were the scary people. We would come into the schools and kids would cower, like, please don't make me go with him, because the things that we were involved with were truly, in that era, frightening to many of those students. And to us, because we weren't all that safe.
So my next reduction is you own what you create.
Yeah. We are, this is an activity that I often do with groups, and I'll do it with you briefly, although we won't have time to put it up on a board. Brent asked me the most important experience when I was a child. If you were to ask me other experiences in my life, they would change radically. And so we are, as you know, we are an accumulation of our experiences. And so the fundamental question I think that we have to ask ourselves is, are we a result of the bad experiences that happened to us, death of a father at 15, or are we the result of the experiences that we create for ourselves? And again, to reduce things to simple, it's been my experience that the happier, more successful people that I know create the experiences that they consider to be life-changing, as opposed to simply respond. So I guess if you're sitting in the audience and the most important experiences are things that you've had to adjust to, but you didn't create, I would ask you to consider being the creator of the experiences that you will someday look back on as being the most important experiences of your life. It's just turned out to be a theme that I feel comfortable advocating, and it's the theme that I advocate with my own children. At the end of a 5-year period, it really is a good idea if your peak experience is something that you helped create, and it wasn't just something that you were able to adjust to.
Diversity makes groups better.
It's obvious. Diversity makes groups better. The more power that we have, the easier it is for us to surround ourselves with people like us. Most of you are emerging. Many of you have positions of power, and I think all of you would agree to that. The more power that you have, the easier it is for you to surround yourself with people that are very much like you. And I've learned, sometimes the hard way, that successful organizations, successful teams, successful people are embedded in very diverse work groups. After a lifetime of research on moral reasoning, if someone were to say to me, you know, I've got a 12-year-old son, and I want him to be as ethical and as well-developed as possible, what would you say, Dan? Not that anyone would ever do that, but if they did, I would say, try to push that kid or that daughter, that boy or that girl, into a situation where they are dealing with differences. Because the process of trying to figure out how to deal with differences is what expands our mind. And it's a hard thing. We're drawn to people that are like us. I mean, you can just kind of take a look at our organizations. But it is really, really important, I think, to try to get as much diversity as possible. And I'm talking about diversity in the broadest sense. I'm talking about orientation, and I'm talking about sort of cognitive attitude and everything.
So, something that you...
We are the world. We are the children.
I want to say that this is all these like getting all these flashbacks. I remember being at the Santa Fe Mountain Center, and we were planning the international conference in Santa Fe, and you were at the Mountain Center, and they talked about how to close the workshop, and Dan said, "But I really think that we should sing Kumbaya." And it was silence, and everyone just looked, and I, of course, I'm like giggling, but everyone's so silent. I thought, well, maybe he is serious. And you just like kind of let it sit out there for about 10 or 15 seconds. And you're like, no. So it's just a great moment when you start.
I think any of you that have an opportunity to speak in front of a group, whether it's a large group or a small group, the kids get off the bus and now they're running to you from the van. Rule number one in life, amuse yourself. Say things to them that you find funny. It's a whole lot better than saying things to them that you think they're going to find funny. Trust me. Crack yourself up in life, and people will join you. So yeah, I mean, the Kumbaya was obviously, I'd been in the room for too long, I was bored, and I wanted to make myself forget what we were talking about.
You did a great job at the closing, though. That was a nice voice.
It was memorable.
I guess another story is about, sort of relates to diversity, is that leaving the world of comfort is a privileged view of experiential ed. And I'm referencing that, I guess, talking to some women in India at a conference.
I went to the first international conference on experiential education. I represented the United States at a gathering that occurred in England, and so experiential educators from all over the world assembled, and we talked to each other. And I thought that experiential ed was what we did, and what I found out was that experiential ed to people in South Africa was radical educational reform. It had nothing to do with taking people out. It had everything to do with organizing people to take control of their schooling, especially in the settlements. So an experiential educator, Tony Saddington, some of you may know him, Tony Saddington was involved in educational reform without any of the things that we do. Experiential education, an experiential educator from India, was someone who was really involved in deconstructing the caste system in India. And the story that Brent's referring to is we got into a work group one time and we were each sharing with each other what we did and our definition of experiential ed. And I was suitably lofty, it was based on Dewey and yada, yada, yada. And I was yapping and talking. And finally, this woman from India looked at me and she said, let me see if I understand this. She said, you put people in the woods and you take away their food and you take away their shelter and then you get them to write about it, and then when they come out, you consider that to have been an educational experience. And she wasn't trying to be snide, she was truly baffled by this. And I got this overwhelming understanding in a nanosecond that much of what we do is predicated on the fact that we have choice. That for someone living in a Dalit village, which is the underclass in India, the experience that I just described is the experience of their existence. And so the idea that we do things that put us in temporarily uncomfortable situations, whether those are risky situations or whatever, is really a function of privilege. And for me, I had better never forget that. And I had better never forget that when I'm working with different groups, I do a lot of work now in the Navajo Nation. I have to constantly be reacquainted with the fact that 60% of the people on the Navajo reservation live in poverty, that 96% of the kids in the largest high school, now keep in mind, the Navajo Nation is about the size of New England, geographically. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of people there. At Chinle High School, 96% of those kids don't graduate from high school. So there are ample opportunities even within our own country to think about what are we doing, and is it appropriate for us to be doing the things we're doing given the experiences of the people that we're working with. Anyway.
So at this point, I guess I'd like to open it up to people who have questions for the next 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah,
if we can.
that would be really,
And
that'd be wonderful.
great. And I'm not sure how to. What's that?
2 minutes. 1 minute. 1 question. 2 questions. Wait, there's a...
We're negotiating.
There's a hand sign thing going on here.
Does anyone have a question? And I guess we can, maybe you come out here at the mic, or we have switch mics with you. Will that work? Scary feedback thing. We got one. There's a lot of pressure, I know.
There's a question over here.
Oh, how convenient. Thank you.
What's something that you're working on learning right now?
That's a golf. I'm trying to get a handle on this whole integrated philosophy that I referred to earlier with Ken Wilber stuff. I'm trying to figure out what he's talking about in the deeper way. So I guess that would be, from a sort of an intellectual perspective. I go to work every day like you all do, and I have to do my work and that kind of stuff. But I find that to be work, and I love it, and I love the people, and I love the school, and I'd love to take you there if you'd like to transfer. But intellectually, I'm sort of dealing with that. And I'm also, I guess, recently I've started to collect my thoughts to write. I don't understand the consciousness that exists right now that allows us to believe that somehow military intervention will stop terrorism. I don't understand it. I can't find any place in history where military intervention has been a deterrent to terrorism. So, I'm not trying to make this a stump speech, but I really am. I'm really trying to figure out how can this be? How can we as a species see something that is so obviously ineffective and want to practice it? I mean, what is that about? So I'm trying to figure it out, and that led me to sort of other things like how much more information do we need on the problems with smoking? So what's the disconnect between information and action? That's something I'm trying to get to, because I know now that it's not just information. It's not information that changes people's behavior. There's something else, and I'm trying to figure out. And someday, I suspect that I'll discover it. I'll come running out with a hot new theory and go to an AE conference, and they'll put me in a special interest group of people that have already done this.
That's great. Does anyone else have a quick question? Like 2 more minutes.
Do you have any leads on your idea to connect that?
Do I have any leads on my idea to connect the dots between?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I could be glib right now and respond, but yeah, I mean, I have some leads. It has to do with, to me, how vigorously people will hold on to a particular mindset, whatever that mindset is. Once we declare ourselves in a trajectory, and you figure out what that trajectory is for you, whatever you've declared is your trajectory, and we have to use these in our lives all over the place. We will hold on like a dog on a bone to that trajectory. And I think that it's part and parcel of some other ways in which we find it hard to let go of the way we would want the world to be. Sorry, I hope I honored the question without, but there's a lot more there. It's unbelievably deep, as a matter of fact. Profound is the word I was searching for. Anyway,
Well, I think
this
that's...
seems like a good time to thank you. And remember, spend a couple of seconds and shake Keith's hand, and have a wonderful conference. And thank you for honoring this process.
Thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate it.